We, as a society, looking back on the Second World War, always seem to hear about how the Nazis reigned supreme at the height of their power, and the common folk were powerless to their whims, however twisted they may have been. What we might not hear about as often is the people that really distinguish themselves from the collective and exclusive Volk, a term coined by the Nazis to include all that they saw as being fit to join the ranks of the Master Aryan race. These groups and individuals stood out from the groundswell of people towing the Nazi party line. For their part, they set an example and made history as one of the very few examples of courage, even when facing certain death. No forms of domestic resistance or peaceful protest was permitted by the people the Nazis would come to govern. It would all assuredly be quashed if practiced in the open. These brave but unfortunately naive people would wind up as political prisoners or worse. Most would meet the firing squads for their beliefs in a free Germany. Many of the people who acted in this way will likely never be known. The Nazi secret police, the Gestapo, would effectively scrub every work that ran counter to their government's own propaganda. What is fortunate for the history books is the number of networks that would move operations underground when they saw the Nazis' tendencies towards brutality against those they saw as transgressors. The White Rose Society was a movement made up of students and at least one professor. They were operating and socializing at the University of Munich. Each had a strong desire to see an end to the oppressive regime, which they had come to know over 10 years of governance. They started small, with graffiti. The propaganda wing of the Nazis, by the middle of the World War II, had become all-encompassing. The press, the law, and the school systems were all tooled to indoctrinate their students. The White Rose Society saw this as a step too far. They formed a clandestine network, bought a printing press to begin producing and distributing anti-establishment leaflets amongst various German cities, housing sympathizers of the society. The leaflets railed against the injustice being faced in the wake of this Nazi tide. Eventually, this anti-government propaganda was being found by foreign news agencies. Now that there was a modicum of success being attributed to this group of students, they would soon be sought out by the Gestapo, and after only 7 produced works were discovered and dealt with swiftly. All members of the White Rose were executed, and none regretted their position. For to die nobly for a just cause is more purpose than most find in a lifetime. The White Rose Society would have meant the world to the White Rose Society for their families to know that Allied bombers would soon be swapping bombs for their very leaflets to rain down a soothing deluge and not the same hellish destruction already brought on by the Nazis. In the 6th leaflet, produced by the White Rose, there was a message directed at the German people and those who would consider themselves part of the revered Volk. They were told everything that they weren't permitted to know by their government, that they were sacrificing their youth so that party sycophants could perpetuate their rule and corrupt their young bright minds with lies to further their own ends. One lie that kept the youth ignorant to the true nature of the Nazis was the idea of the Untermensch, or undesirables, which included Jews, Roma, homosexuals, and a variety of people. Considered opposite to the Aryans, these undesirables would become the targets of a growing racial rhetoric. They would need expelling from German society by any means. This would become the nationalists' goal. To avoid questions, the Nazis would provide biased examples already accepted by the elite of Germany. One such example was the pseudoscience of phrenology, which espoused that the head shape in every race was different, and thus the brain was better suited for certain societies. This being an early 19th century European study, it was not at all an unbiased opinion, and it was self-serving for the white European nobles that wanted reasoning to further their colonial aspirations. This served to exploit many societies into believing the white race was biologically superior, and that they were needed to make other nations civilized. This rhetoric, though it had already been deemed obsolete by the time the Nazis came to power, still had its faithful around the world, and they would provide it with fresh new material. The Nazis would work this into its feverish crowds of desperate people, and they ate it up. Starved for responsibility, the German nation wholeheartedly accepted its newfound Nazi goal and tossed its youth towards the true goal the mouth of a growing war machine, soon to learn its mistake, as many more would. Few people ever found ways to stand against the war machine once it hit its high watermark. The unfeeling, paranoid, and brutal approach Nazis had to diplomacy left none to match them by conventional means. It took someone as daring and tough to head them off and attempt to stall the Nazi pogrom, because an individual cannot hope to stop them alone. Raoul Wallenberg was one such man who made his stand against the evil empire. He had no business getting himself involved with the humanitarian effort required, but he laid his life on the line nonetheless. Raoul came from Sweden, a long-declared neutral state, and was educated in architecture in the USA. Raoul gained a sense of brutality while he tried roughing it in Depression-era America. He was robbed, and though he kept his composure, the experience taught him to become more devious. When Raoul returned to Sweden, Europe was in dire straits. The Nazis were well on their way to conquering the continent. Sweden, being on the outskirts of the Nazi sphere of influence, was able to operate with impunity. So Raoul and a business partner of his made connections with the continent, specifically in Nazi-allied Hungary. Soon it became clear that the Nazis were up to reprehensible things throughout Europe. When the Nazis began to lose ground they had won in mid-1944, they began to speed up their race to wipe out all undesirables. They started to make demands of their allies to deport all of the undesirables that they asked for. When Hungary didn't comply with the German demands, the Nazis invaded and installed a puppet government. They began deportations upon arrival. Sweden, not about to risk military intervention, preferred a more subtle tactic in their humanitarian effort, and Raoul Wallenberg was pointed out by his business partners as the man to carry out such a devious ploy. When Raoul showed up in Budapest, Hungary, he found any and all Jewish people and gave them diplomatic passports issued from the Swedish government. He was now a diplomat with the power to pass immunity on to those he thought deserved it. Raoul's technical skill also came in handy when he was tasked to find homes for what were effectively refugees. He rented buildings designed to hold 5,000 people and transformed them into places to hold 35,000. Wallenberg was reviled by the Nazi high command, earning the nickname Jew Dog for his ruthless and tenacious behavior. He showed to their underlings. Raoul would stop trains, interrupt executions, and follow forced death marches, all while working on 4 hours of sleep a night. Raoul provided a shield for those most desperate for one, and when the scourge had finally been swept away from Budapest by the Soviets, it is estimated that he had helped preserve 100,000 people. Unfortunately, Raoul would not be believed by the Soviets as the man capable of performing such a miracle. He could not be devious enough to outwit a nation already paranoid from the Nazis. Raoul was figured to be a spy, and presumably executed, though this was not public knowledge for years to come. He was listed as missing and never personally given that public reference that would be deserving by a man of his caliber. It is impossible to say just what the price that ended up being paid by averting our moral compasses away from a budding dictatorial state like Nazi Germany. We might only find hope in the small victories that contrast the net losses. What the White Rose and Raoul Wallenberg and others inspired by people like them had in common was the downfall of the Nazi state, the triumph of truth over a lie necessarily. These martyrs of the truth stand to show us an example of hope in hopeless times, something that we as a global society may all strive for and learn from if we are to encounter evil amounting to what we have experienced in the 20th century. We have to hope our heroes' spirits have left deep impressions on us, so that they must never be forgotten.